32 teams, 32 stadiums, and not one of them looks like another. One team plays under a roof so thin you could poke a hole in it with a car key, and it still keeps out the weather. Another team plays outdoors in temperatures that drop below zero on purpose, because the cold has become part of the brand. One stadium cost over $5 billion. Another one, still packed every Sunday, was finished before color television existed. None of that is an accident. Every one of these buildings is a solved problem: weather, land, money, history, poured directly into concrete and steel. Two teams can have the exact same budget and the exact same seating capacity and still end up with buildings that look like they belong to two different sports entirely. This is why every NFL stadium looks different. Let's get into it. Start with the most obvious driver, the weather. Some teams play in cities where a January outdoor game means single-digit wind chill and snow on the benches. Others play somewhere it never gets cold enough to justify a roof at all. That one geographic fact decides what kind of building gets built before an architect ever sketches a single line. Lambeau Field leans all the way into the cold. The frozen tundra isn't a nickname the Packers fight against. It's a competitive weapon. Visiting teams from warm climates fly in and freeze. The Packers train in it every week. The stadium never got enclosed because the cold was never the problem. It was the plan. Las Vegas has no snow to lean into, so the Raiders sealed the whole thing off instead. Allegiant Stadium, fully enclosed, air-conditioned, built practically on top of the strip, treating the building less like a football stadium and more like another casino resort. Same sport, completely different planet. A few teams split the difference instead. Build a roof, but make it move. Retractable roofs exist for cities where the weather swings too much for either extreme to make sense. Open it on a perfect afternoon. Close it before a storm rolls in. It sounds simple. It isn't. Moving thousands of tons of steel back and forth requires machinery engineered to keep working flawlessly for decades without ever getting stuck halfway open during a nationally televised game. Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta took that idea and made it strange on purpose. An 8-panel roof that opens in a rotating pinwheel pattern modeled after a camera aperture, because Atlanta's weather is humid and unpredictable enough that neither always open nor always closed was ever going to cut it. And then there's Buffalo, which didn't bother with a roof at all. Snow at Highmark Stadium gets so severe that the team has actually paid fans by the hour to shovel it off the seats before kickoff. An image that's become almost as much a part of the Bills' identity as anything that happens on the field. Same logic as Lambeau, just taken further. If the weather's going to be brutal no matter what you build, let it become part of the show. Weather explains a lot. It doesn't explain everything. Some of the strangest, most expensive features in the league have nothing to do with rain or snow at all. SoFi Stadium is the most expensive stadium ever built, north of $5 billion, in a city that barely has a weather problem to solve. So why does it have one of the most complicated roofs in football? It's not fighting the weather, it's fighting a height restriction. The site sits close enough to LAX's flight path that architects couldn't build upward the way a normal stadium would. So they turned the restriction into the signature feature, a massive translucent canopy made of ETFE, thin enough to look weightless, flooding the building with natural light while technically still counting as indoors. The bowl itself was sunk deep into the ground rather than built up, a deliberate choice made just to stay under that height limit while still fitting more than 70,000 seats. It's the kind of design decision that never would have existed if the site had simply been an open field somewhere with no airspace to worry about. And it's why SoFi looks nothing like any dome or open-air stadium built before it. Sometimes, a stadium's entire identity gets built around a restriction nobody outside the design team ever hears about. US Bank Stadium in Minneapolis was designed with a single glass wall angled toward the city skyline, shaped partly by local zoning rules about which direction the building could actually face. Empower Field in Denver sits at over 5,000 feet of elevation, thin enough air that it genuinely changes how footballs travel. Longer field goals, faster moving passes, even though nothing about the building's shape gives that away. Not every constraint shows up as a dramatic roof. Some of them are invisible, baked into the site itself. Money explains just as much of the mismatch as weather does. A stadium built with public funding, hotel taxes, bonds, government money, answers to taxpayers. Every extra flourish gets scrutinized. Every overrun becomes a headline. Allegiant's build was roughly 40% funded through a hotel tax alone. A stadium built with private capital. MetLife and SoFi both went up without a dollar of public money. Answers to one person's ambition instead. Nobody's asking why the roof costs another few $100 million, if the person paying for it wants to spend it. And costs keep climbing. The Bills' new stadium in Buffalo, backed heavily by public funds, has already blown past $2 billion in overruns nobody fully anticipated when the deal was signed. MetLife cost about $1.6 billion when it opened, and would run well over $2 billion to build today. Same league, Same era, wildly different math, because the money came from wildly different places and answered to wildly different people. Public money means public hearings, committee reviews, elected officials who have to defend every dollar to voters. Private money means one signature. Then, there's the oldest reason of all: history. Only a couple of stadiums in the league still refuse to sell their naming rights. A genuine rarity now that 9-figure sponsorship deals are the norm across almost every other venue. Lambeau Field kept its name honoring the team's founder, and the Packers have said flatly it will never change, no matter the offer. Soldier Field kept its name too, a memorial to soldiers who died in the First World War, untouchable while nearly every other team in the league has cashed that check. You can engineer a $5 billion canopy. You can't manufacture 70 years of frozen championships or a name tied to a piece of national memory. A few franchises decided history was worth more than the sponsorship revenue, and it shows in exactly how little those buildings have changed while everything around them modernized. That shows up physically too, not just financially. Soldier Field's colonnades, the tall stone columns that have framed the stadium since it opened in the 1920s, survived a full modern renovation in the early 2000s, specifically because tearing them down would have erased the one thing people actually associated with the building's history. The team built an entirely new, modern bowl of seating inside those old stone walls instead of replacing them outright. It looks a little odd from certain angles, a gleaming modern seating bowl wrapped inside a 100-year-old stone shell. The kind of compromise that only happens when a franchise decides history is worth designing around instead of designing over. It's also the only reason that history still exists at all. Sound is a variable most fans never think about until they're standing inside a building engineered around it. Arrowhead Stadium has built its whole identity on crowd noise, recognized as one of the loudest outdoor stadiums on the planet, a real home field advantage that shows up in false start penalties nearly every season. That volume isn't just passion, it's geometry. Steep upper decks pitched close to the field instead of set back gently. Concrete and steel chosen because they reflect sound instead of absorbing it. Put that same crowd in a wide-open stadium with shallower seating angles, and it doesn't sound anywhere near as loud, even with identical attendance. Enclose the whole thing in a dome instead, the way New Orleans did with the Superdome, and the sound has nowhere to escape to at all, part of why that building has hosted more Super Bowls than any other venue in league history. A stadium can be designed to be deafening on purpose, the same way it can be designed to feel calm and comfortable on purpose. And then there's the simplest variable of all. Sometimes two teams have to share one building. MetLife Stadium is home to both the Giants and the Jets, which means the architecture has to stay neutral in a way a single-team building never does. No team-specific color scheme baked into the concrete, no single identity plastered across the concourse, two owners and two organizations sharing one address without either one truly owning the place. SoFi Stadium faces the same problem, splitting its home between the Rams and the Chargers. Part of why its interior leans so heavily on a massive shared video board and neutral materials instead of one team's colors. Compare either of those to AT&T Stadium in Texas, built entirely around one owner's vision and one franchise's identity. Completely free to lean into a single team's brand without a second tenant's colors to worry about. Same league, two very different design briefs, dictated entirely by how many teams had to agree to live there. Every one of these buildings, in the end, is the physical answer to a different question. The weather here. The legal restrictions on this site. Whose money and how much of it? How much history is worth protecting? How loud this place should feel? One team or two. Change one variable and you get a completely different building, even with the exact same sport being played inside it. Swap Lambeau's climate for Las Vegas, and you don't get a slightly different frozen tundra. You get Allegiant. Swap SoFi's flight path restriction for open land in the middle of nowhere, and the translucent canopy never gets invented at all. These aren't small, stylistic choices layered on top of an otherwise identical building. They're the entire reason the buildings exist in the shape they're in. That's also why some of these stadiums have become tourist attractions in their own right, worth visiting even on a random Tuesday when there's no game at all. Nobody flies across the country to look at a parking lot. People do fly across the country to stand underneath SoFi's canopy or walk the frozen concourse at Lambeau because the building itself has become the destination, independent of whichever two teams happen to be playing that particular Sunday. If one stadium feels like a monument and another feels like a spaceship, it was never about which team hired better architects. It was about which specific problem, weather, engineering, money, history, sound, ownership, that building actually had to solve. And that gap is only going to widen. New stadiums keep getting more expensive and more dependent on private money instead of public funding, which means a few more franchises are about to face the same decision Green Bay and Chicago already made: protect the history or chase the next billion-dollar spectacle. How they answer is going to shape what NFL stadiums look like for the next generation of fans. 32 teams, 32 stadiums, one sport, and 100 different answers to the same basic questions. That's why no two NFL stadiums look alike, and why the buildings themselves are now as much a part of the league as the games played inside them.